A lot of you probably know mythology and ancient history like the back of your hand, but some mysteries blur this line to the point that we don't even know the truth anymore. You got basic stuff like the Great Flood and Romulus founding Rome, but we're gonna dive deeper in this video. Some things have no good explanation, but some things just require a little bit of critical thinking, so let's jump into these ancient mysteries right now. We're gonna start this thing off with the Plutonion at Hierapolis. Alright, so as we all know, the Roman god of the underworld was Pluto, so the Plutonion is a shrine to him. It's said that shrines like this serve as gates to the underworld, and with a little bit more context, this makes a lot of sense. The thing is, these Plutonian shrines are most of the time located in places that emit lots of toxic gases to everywhere around it, so like waves of death come across the wildlife and people around the area, and just, it's a bad deal. So that's what a Plutonian is, but we gotta ask the question, why is this one at Hierapolis so special? Well, to start with, Hierapolis is a Greek city built on a cult center and hot spring in like the Anatolia region of Turkey. This cult center that was what the city was built around was a cult of the Phrygian goddess Cybele, but in the Greek days it was actually taken over by the cult of Apollo. Now this first cult of Cybele recognized that this place was a gate to hell or whatever because there was a deadly cave underneath it. This cave was absolutely full of waves of carbon dioxide that were coming off of volcanic activity. Now priests of this cult would go down into the cave, they would hold their breath, and they would come back up and they would be just fine, and everybody thought they were holy because of that. Obviously, if you go down there and you don't breathe in the carbon dioxide, you're not gonna die. Like, nothing's gonna happen to you if you don't breathe in the toxic gas. In some cases, these priests would even take animals down there with them, and they would come back dragging their animals because the animals died because, you know, they breathe in the carbon dioxide. They don't know not to breathe. I guess it's kind of helped their credibility with the people around there at the time. They kind of proved their divinity or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like just animal sacrifice to me, though. It's kind of cruel. Now, during the Roman days, this place functioned very similarly, but it actually became known as Pluto's Gate. Like I said, rituals of animal sacrifice to Pluto would go on down there, and in hindsight, that's just really sad. So while this gate to hell was pretty cool and all, it's actually kind of a danger to even be around. It's been said that groups of birds would fly over, and on particularly bad days where there's lots of carbon dioxide coming out of the cave, they would breathe it in and they would drop dead. Like, that's very sad. Now, during the Christian takeover of Rome, this place was actually sealed up because of pagan rituals, such and such, all that kind of stuff, and it was actually buried by an earthquake later on, so it actually wasn't unearthed until like pretty recently, actually, in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'm gonna guess that since this place was recently unearthed, that the carbon dioxide emissions are kind of controlled now, but honestly, if you ask me, some places are better off sealed up. The Antikythera Mechanism. Known as the world's first analog computer, the Antikythera Mechanism served ancient Greece as a predictor of astronomical events. Basically, it worked to predict where the sun, moon, and stars were on any given day, and when I say any given day, I mean any day, past, present, or future. The hand crank on this thing could be calibrated to where the celestial bodies were on that given day, and then you could set the thing to predict any other day based on where they are today. It was some seriously advanced astronomical technology for back in that day. Now, when I say back in that day, it originated in ancient Greece all the way back in like 200 to 60 BC, so like over 2,000 years ago. Despite being that old, the first pieces of it weren't found until 1901 in a shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera, Greece, which is where it gets its name. Now, it was originally over a foot tall, but it broke into like 82 small pieces over the years, being on the bottom of the seafloor and all. Now, while I say this thing was super advanced for the time, you gotta realize that the ancient Greeks were like super advanced in their astronomy. They were very, very ahead of their time. Pleiades of Miletus studied at both Babylon and Egypt, which were both very, very advanced in their society before Greece ever even was. As a result of all his studying, this guy successfully predicted a solar eclipse in the year 585 BC, and that paved the way for Cleostratus to thrive. This Cleostratus eventually introduced the zodiac to the world, and that was key in making the Antikythera Mechanism work. So while this thing is technically thought of as a Greek device, it was actually more of a team effort to get it to function properly. Now, the 37 plus gears and the mechanical side of this device were definitely Greek, as were the zodiac planetary movement signs, but the Babylonians and Egyptians contributed some too. The Egyptians contributed their 365-day solar calendar, which allowed the device to track time. And since we mentioned time, this Antikythera device was actually used by the Greeks to track Olympiads, which are 4-year spans in which the Olympics would occur at the end of each. Anyway, the Babylonians set the foundation of math that was necessary to get this thing to track planetary movement and the eclipses and stuff like that. It really seems like the Antikythera Mechanism was the culmination of generations worth of work from all the civilizations around the Hellenistic period, so this thing's really cool to me. Just real quick, thank you for watching. It really does mean the world to me. If you don't mind, hit those like and subscribe buttons if you're enjoying this video, and now let's get back into it. The Lost Mine of Ophir. The Lost Mine of Ophir refers to a legendary gold mine that was owned or at least operated by King Solomon from the Bible. Now, Ophir was originally a name mentioned in the lineage of Shem, who was Noah's son, all the way back in Genesis 10. Later on in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles, it says that King Solomon and the Phoenician king of Tyre, Hiram, brought back abundances of gold from this legendary mine of Ophir. They would send ships, and ships would bring back tons of gold. There's even more mentions in the Bible of this thing whenever Isaiah and Job talk about the finest gold of Ophir. So this begs the question, where in the world is this legendary mine of Ophir? Now, it's pretty easy to say that the lost mine of Ophir was just a biblical storytelling mechanism like they say Darius the Mede was back in the book of Daniel, but there was recently an ancient pottery shard found in Tel Aviv that seemingly confirms the existence of Ophir. Yet again, we can ask, where is this place? Since so many people ask the question, there's tons of answers out there. There's lots of theories as to where this could have been. People say that it could have been in Sri Lanka, India, the Philippines, even America, but the most common theory is that it was actually in Saudi Arabia. So there's a site in Saudi Arabia called Ma'ad ad-Dahab that they say could have held all this gold that they were talking about way back in the day. Biblical accounts say that Solomon brought back 34 tons of gold from Ophir at one point, which equals about $125 million worth of gold to this day. So, you know, that's a lot of gold. Some engineers have examined this Ma'ad ad-Dahab site, and they say that it actually could have held that much, so that's kind of crazy. This site is also well within the bounds of the ships of the day, like Solomon's people from Israel could have made it all the way there and back easily. The port of Aqaba opens up to the Red Sea, and it offers easy access to Saudi Arabia. That's actually a problem to some people who theorize about this, because it's too short of a distance to take as long as the trip was said to take. 2 Chronicles tells us that Solomon's ships would be gone for 3 years on their trips to Ophir and back. These theorists said that Saudi Arabia was too close for it to have taken that long. They could have actually had to mine all the gold once they got there, and that's what took 3 years, but I really don't know. That group of theorists I've been talking about thinks that Sri Lanka or India could actually line up better time-wise with what it would have taken, but you'll have to let me know what you think down below in the comments. Woodhenge. This refers to a timber monument that was built at about the same time and within 2 miles of, guess what? Guess what? Stonehenge. Now, while its big brother Stonehenge gets all the love and attention because the stones that they used back in the day were still there, this place was only found because of the post holes where the timber used to be. It had 168 post holes that were arranged in concentric ovals around the burial site of a child in the center. Now, this theory gets even more disturbing whenever you realize that this child very well could have been a child sacrifice because its skull was split and like splintered in its grave, but that's purely speculation. That's just a theory. Alright, so as I said, Woodhenge was built about the same time as Stonehenge, which was about 2500 BC, and the artifacts found at Woodhenge say that it was probably still in use until the year 1800 BC, so a good 700 years. Now, it was discovered in 1925 when the squad leader Gilbert Insall, who was from the British Royal Air Force, flew over a wheat field and saw these concentric ovals in the wheat field. I think he took pictures of them, and that's how they know it's there. This wheat field was then investigated, and they found the 168 post holes, and now the monument is there. Based on other Neolithic hinges and findings, it probably looked like this. Now, while nobody truly knows what it was used for, Woodhenge is like very underrated. I think it's almost as cool as Stonehenge if you ask me. The Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were a group of gods that the ancient Mesopotamians prayed to and invoked and all that kind of stuff. These people included the Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and even in some form the Hittites, though the Hittites kind of thought they were lower on the totem pole than others. The most important of these gods was said to be Enlil, who served as the god of air and atmosphere and stuff like that, but there were 6 other main gods that were definitely a part of this group. And I say that because we're going to see that there were a lot more that were considered possibly part of the Anunnaki. These 7 main gods stayed relevant through all the different ages of the ancient Mesopotamian cultures. During the Sumerian days, these Anunnaki served as more of what we would think of a god to be as today, kind of like the god of the heavens. Most of the following ages showed these Anunnaki to become the gods of the underworld instead of the creation gods, which is not bad, but you know, it's not all powerful like they were. Speaking of creation, the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, showed these gods in a totally different light. It says that the main Babylonian god Marduk commanded 300 Anunnaki to live on the earth, and 300 more to live in the heavens. I don't care who you are, that's a lot of gods. Alright, so as we all know, the most famous piece of literature from the ancient Mesopotamian days was the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Well, this story says that the Anunnaki served as the 7 great judges of the underworld. That's pretty similar to what I said earlier. All these further ages in the Mesopotamian days said that they served as gods of the underworld. Now that's it for the real stuff on them, but as with every group of ancient gods and deities, beings, stuff like that, there are conspiracy theories. Multiple people over the years have decided that the Anunnaki were actually, guess what? Say it with me. Aliens. One theorist says that the Anunnaki came to Earth over 500 years ago. They started the human race and used the human race as slaves for their mining operation, and as soon as the Great Flood hit, it destroyed their base of operations and they had to leave. Now this might be one of the most unhinged theories I've ever heard, but you know, it kind of makes sense whenever you think about who's writing these theories. But anyway, my personal favorite theory is that the Anunnaki are actually the reptilian overlords that still rule over us to this day, because yep. Hyperborea. This was a mythical place to the far north of the entire known world, so far north that it was even higher than the northern winds. In Greek mythology, the god of the north wind was Boreas, so that kind of tells you where the name comes from. Hyperborea was said to be the home place of a super powerful race of Hyperboreans that lived for over 1,000 years apiece. They were the favorite people of Apollo, and as such, they helped start the oracle at Delphi and the worship at Delos. Now, obviously, the actual location of Hyperborea is not known to us because it may not have even been real. It was said to have been located in the Riphean Mountains where the north wind could not even reach it. Now the problem with this is we don't know if these Riphean Mountains are even real or if they were a name for another set of mountains, or we really don't know. Some people believe them to be the Alps, with the Celtic people of the region serving as the Hyperboreans. Some people say they were near the Black Sea, some say they were near the Danube River, and some people even say they were the Ural Mountains in Russia, but nobody knows for certain. Wherever it was said to be nearly impossible to reach Hyperborea. The peaks of the surrounding Riphean Mountains were guarded by griffins. The valleys were guarded by the Arimaspi tribe, which was one-eyed people that fought with griffins all the time. But anyway, the climate was also so bad, nobody could get there. About the only figures ever said to have reached Hyperborea for a visit were demigods like Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, and them, so you can kind of guess what the Greeks thought about visiting this place. Hyperborea was very similar to Atlantis in the fact that nobody actually went there. It was just a mythical place full of very, very special people. Newgrange. This is a prehistoric monument in Ireland that was said to have been built in about 3200 BC by the people that preceded the Celtic people in the Irish area. Basically, it's a massive tomb with a passage leading to it. The whole thing is comprised of megalithic stones that are up to 279 feet in diameter and up to 43 feet tall, so these things are massive. Now the passageway is 63 feet long and it opens up to 3 graves. These graves probably belong to like the village leaders or something like that, somebody important. Now the stones are engraved with lots of markings of like patterns and stuff that might represent the sun and moon. That's what they interpret it to be, but we don't really know for a fact, you know. Inside the graves were burned and unburned human bones, as well as stuff that served as like grave goods, artifacts, stuff like that. Back to the sun and moon, the entrance to Newgrave has a roof box that allows the sun to shine into the passage for 17 minutes at dawn on the winter solstice. So despite being created all the way back in 3200 BC, which is before Stonehenge and Woodhenge and all of that, these people still knew a lot about astronomy. They must have known a lot about transport too, because if you remember those mega stones I said make up most of the passage, there were 35 of those things. I don't think 35 of them would just originally get there. I think they probably had to move them. Anyway, in Irish mythology, this place represented a portal to the other world, which was basically their heaven. An Irish folktale says that Newgrange and the surrounding monuments belonged to their god Angus, who stole them from his father using trickery. Long story short, Angus told his father, who was the chief god, Dagda, that he wanted to own this place for night and day. His father agrees to this, obviously thinking that it would just be like one night and one day, but Angus says that this place now belongs to him forever because every day is composed of night and day. So there's that. Newgrange is super cool, and I could go on for a long time about it if I really wanted to, but honestly, you should just go see it. You can book tours to there right now. Roman Dodecahedron. A Roman dodecahedron looks like this, and it's made of copper alloy with no inscriptions, no anything like that, just some cutouts in the middle. As the name implies, it's just a dodecahedron with little metal balls on each vertex. These things date back to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries AD, but the fact of the matter is nobody knows what these were used for. That we are literally clueless. They've been found literally all over Europe except in the mainland of Rome and Italy, which kind of makes no sense at all, but whenever you think about it, these things are actually called the Gallic Roman dodecahedrons, so that does make sense. We'll talk some more about the Gauls here in a little bit. I'm excited. The thing is, there's no standard size for these things. They range from like 4 centimeters all the way up to 11 centimeters, and from weighing 35 grams all the way up to 1,000 grams. This means that the theory that they were probably used for measuring devices is totally out the window. Because of the insane tediousness that it takes to make these things, it's concluded that they were probably used in something important to society. Some people theorize that they might have been used in like religious rituals, but my favorite theory is that they were actually used for magic. Let me explain. So they were not found in mainland Rome. They were found in the Gallic regions, which is where the Gauls were. So they were probably made by the Gauls. Now the Gauls believed in magic big time. Like they had spirits, they had druids that ruled over them, and they just practiced a lot of magical rituals. Couple this with the fact that the Roman Empire would eventually outlaw magical practices because of its turn to Christianity, and we've got a really good explanation as to why nobody knows what these things were used for. They were used for magic, and anything that was written down about the magical rituals had to be disposed of either by the Christian Romans or by the Gauls who didn't want to get caught by the Christian Romans. This magic would remain a secret to the end of time. But I don't know, they could have just been used as expensive dice for the rich people in Roman and Gallic society, but let me know what you think. I don't know. The Bent Pyramid of Sneferu. This refers to a pyramid built in roughly 2600 BC by the Egyptian pharaoh Sneferu. The unique thing about this pyramid is that it started out being built at about a 54-degree angle, but at like 154 feet up, they decided to change it to a 43-degree angle. This change in the middle of the construction of the pyramid makes it look like the pyramid is bent, like you can see here on the screen. It's actually really cool and unique looking if you ask me, but you know, I'm not very important. Another difference is that this pyramid is actually built with smooth sides, unlike the step pyramid of before. The step-sided pyramid that Imhotep built before was at an angle of close to 54 degrees, so it's likely that Sneferu's engineers just try to replicate this, but in a smooth-sided pyramid. This 54-degree angle did not work, as they found out about 154 feet up, so they had to change the angle. They changed the angle to 43 degrees, and while it looks kind of funny, it makes it really unique. And they discovered for future reference that the 43-degree angle does work for a smooth-sided pyramid, so it's a win-win. Not long after this discovery, Sneferu commissions the Red Pyramid to be built at a 43-degree angle, where it still stands today. Now, I've told you all this stuff that actually makes sense, but what if that was just like justifications for what actually happened? What if aliens came down to Egypt and taught them how to build the pyramids to harness the energy of the universe, and they use it to power their spaceships and leave? Yep, that's it. The mystery of the Pleiades across ancient civilizations. The Pleiades are a star cluster in the night sky whose movements were tracked by ancient civilizations all across the globe. The movements of the cluster have important meanings for these people, but for now, let's just talk about lore. The Pleiades were almost always referred to as 7 sisters or 7 women in general. The thing is, only 6 stars are visible to this day, but once upon a time, 7 actually were visible to the naked eye. The problem with this is that it would have been over 100,000 years ago when this was the case, at least according to one theory. Now, this theory relies on evolution and the migration of humans, so take that how you will, but it says that all these people must have been still in the home continent of Africa before they migrated out whenever the 7 stars were up in the sky. 50,000 years later, whenever the migration of humans started, they carried these stories and this folktale to everywhere they went. That's why all these different cultures still talk about 7 women representing the Pleiades. Anyway, the Greek interpretation of the Pleiades is probably the most popular on the list. It says that they're the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas and the Oceanid Pleione. As Atlas was forced to hold up the weight of the heavens on his shoulders, the hunter Orion started chasing his daughters, the Pleiades. To comfort Atlas, Zeus made the Pleiades into stars, but he also made Orion into a star constellation, so it looks like the constellation of Orion is still chasing the Pleiades to this day. Similar stories like this exist across different cultures and different peoples, even among like Jewish people and Native Americans, which are 2 groups you really wouldn't think to be intertwined with Greek mythology. And I guess they're really not intertwined with Greek mythology, it's just stars and astronomy, which that's everywhere. If you can name a people, they have at least a little bit of folklore about the 7 sisters, or at least 7 women, so this lends credit to the theory that they were all together at one time on Africa before they migrated out. Now, I personally don't believe in the entirety of the evolution and migration theory, but I do believe that people were together at one point. You know, the Tower of Babel did happen in the Bible, so you got that. That could have been when it happened. Now, as for how the star cluster was used by these different people, it most of the time went something like this. As the Pleiades fell with the sunset, it meant one thing, and as the Pleiades rose with the sunrise, it meant something different, normally the opposite. For the Berber tribe of Africa, Africa, it meant that hot summer was approaching and cold winter was approaching, respectively. So like most celestial bodies and astronomical figures, these Pleiades meant something to these ancient civilizations that had rudimentary skill with astronomy. Alright, so we mentioned Woodhenge and its origins, but now you need a deep dive into its big brother Stonehenge, right? Check out this video linked on screen that talks all about Stonehenge. I'm gonna go find the gold mine of Ophir. Peace.